On a lonely stretch of highway cutting across rural Texas, where the asphalt blends with the dusty landscape and time seems to pass in silence, fate had in store a surprise that no one could have predicted, especially those who chose to ignore the silent signals of the heart. Michael Carter, a successful businessman accustomed to the glow of city lights and the comforts of a life ruled by calculations and cold decisions, lived immersed in a world of appearances and measured interests. During a trip he believed would be yet another routine excursion for business matters, Michael spotted, on the side of the road, a motionless, defenseless dog left to the mercy of abandonment. Immediately, he regarded the creature as nothing but an inconvenience disrupting his journey. Showing not the slightest trace of compassion, the businessman pressed down on the accelerator, leaving behind not only a helpless being, but also all the silent pleas emanating from that fragile existence. The dog, who would later be named Buddy by local residents, was not only paralyzed physically, apparently due to some traumatic event, but carried in his gaze a hope for a second chance, as though he held within himself a deeply rooted desire to be loved and cared for. His fur, once shiny and soft, was now matted and dirty, a silent witness to days of suffering and neglect. Still, behind that frail appearance beat a heart that refused to give up, that believed kindness could exist in a world of human indifference. As Michael's car disappeared around a distant bend, sealing the animal's fate seemed inevitable. But the course of this story would not be written by the indifference of one powerful man alone. Evelyn, a retired nurse known for her sensitivity and unconditional love for animals, was going about her simple routine in a small rural community when she crossed paths with Buddy. With her keen, caring eye, Evelyn immediately sensed that behind the dog's paralysis and the marks of abandonment lay a surprising inner strength. Buddy, even scarred by neglect, seemed to carry a resilient spark that defied human cruelty. Moved by this realization, Evelyn took the dog into her modest home, a place steeped in stories of overcoming hardship, a refuge for wounded souls. Evelyn's house, with walls faded by time and antique furniture filled with memories, was already known in the community as a safe harbor for abandoned animals, injured birds, and even the occasional person needing a place to heal invisible wounds. At 65, with hands calloused from years of hard work and eyes still reflecting youthful brightness, Evelyn believed firmly that her purpose on this earth was to ease suffering wherever it crossed her path. In the days that followed, as the sun set against a horizon painted with hope, the rural community rallied around Buddy, who quickly became a living symbol of resilience and unity. News about the dog's abandonment and the subsequent transformation through kindness and empathy echoed on social media and made headlines in local newspapers, sparking both compassion and outrage. Michael, who in his corporate world had always prized an immaculate public image, suddenly found himself in a storm of scathing criticism, where doubts about his humanity and the nature of his values grew ever more intense. The negative backlash forced him into an internal crisis. His material success could no longer mask a glaring lack of compassion. For the first time, the corporate empire he had built so meticulously seemed trivial in the face of such an ethical tempest. Endless calls from reporters, a flood of angry messages on social media, the contemptuous looks from employees who once admired him. All of it now closed in on Michael. Even his family began to question his actions, especially his youngest daughter, Hannah, a passionate advocate for animal welfare, who found herself struggling to reconcile her idealized image of her father with this act of cruelty now exposed to the world. Then the story took a surprising turn, as reports indicated an inexplicable improvement in Buddy's condition. Local doctors and veterinarians, bewildered, noted that the dog showed signs of physical recovery that defied conventional treatments. It was as though the positive energy generated by collective affection had the power to counteract the effects of abandonment. Evelyn turned her modest home into a veritable improvised rehabilitation center, where every gesture of love and every act of care seemed to be a soothing balm for a spirit scarred by neglect. While the community rejoiced over Buddy's slow but steady progress, He regained some mobility and a new spark in his eyes. Michael watched his once pristine image crumble in the face of a harsh reality. Cold, calculating acts can ripple far beyond one's personal world. As the days became weeks, Buddy's journey became intertwined with the story of a community rediscovering, through simple acts of kindness, the deeper meaning of empathy. The once abandoned dog left on a deserted road now radiated hope, offering a reminder that redemption can arise in the most unexpected places. His transformation was not just physical, but spiritual. Every caring touch, every encouraging word strengthened the human bonds around him, highlighting the importance of looking beyond appearances and recognizing the inherent value of every life. The residents' collective effort showed that, regardless of personal differences or prejudices, unity and mutual care can rewrite the future and reshape destinies. As the story spread nationwide, provoking profound soul-searching about society's values, Michael, isolated in a world of hollow success, was haunted by the shadows of his choices. Public outrage and his own guilt eroded the armor that had always protected him, revealing that the true measure of a person lies not in social standing or accumulated wealth, but in the capacity to feel, to care, and to offer a second chance to those who need it most. Thus, the highway where his act of abandonment had taken place turned into a stage for redemption, where the rescue of a defenseless creature paved the way for a new path of compassion and unconditional love. Even amid disdain and indifference, hope was reborn, touching the hearts of all who were willing to look beyond appearances and act with sincerity. The impact of Buddy's story on social media grew by the day. Videos showing his small yet steady progress in rehabilitation went viral, garnering millions of views. People shared messages of support, donated to help cover medical expenses, and some even traveled great distances to see the dog who had touched so many hearts. The case made it onto national television programs, where experts discussed not only animal abandonment, but also the indifference with which many people treat fundamental matters of empathy and compassion. Caught up in the media storm, Michael tried to hide. His business partners began questioning his position in the company, fearful that associating with someone who could act so cruelly would damage their enterprise. Customers canceled contracts, investors withdrew funding, and the empire Michael had built began to crumble, brick by brick. The once confident, dominant businessman could barely step outside, hounded by condemning glances and harsh words. One sleepless night, staring at the ceiling of his empty mansion, Michael felt something he had not experienced in years: remorse. The memory of the abandoned dog along the highway played in an endless loop in his mind. He remembered the animal's eyes, an expression he had completely ignored at the time, but which he now recognized as a silent plea for help. For the first time in years, tears fell from his face. Tears not of self-pity, but of genuine regret, welling up from the depths of an awakening conscience. Meanwhile, in Evelyn's home, Buddy pressed on in his recovery. The retired nurse's dedication was tireless. She spent hours massaging Buddy's paralyzed legs, applying natural remedies she'd learned from her grandmother, a locally renowned folk healer. She talked constantly with Buddy, telling stories, singing old songs, and whispering secrets as though he understood every word. And maybe he did, because his eyes sparkled with a brightness that seemed to answer each gesture of affection. The veterinarians following Buddy's case struggled to explain his progress. According to their initial diagnoses, he would never move his back legs again. Yet small twitches were observed, then tentative voluntary movements. And finally, to everyone's amazement, on a particularly sunny morning, Buddy managed to stand on his own for a few seconds before wobbling back, down. Overcome by that moment, Evelyn sank to her knees beside him, hugging him with tears of joy and gratitude. That brief, unsteady stance signified more than a physical breakthrough. It was proof that the impossible could become possible when fueled by love and belief. The rural community, traditionally quiet and reserved, experienced its own transformation. Thanks to Buddy, neighbors who barely acknowledged each other now organized joint efforts to help Evelyn, taking shifts to care for the dog, building ramps to assist his movements, and cooking special meals they'd researched online. Children who once filled their free time with video games and social media now spent hours playing with Buddy, reading him stories, or simply sitting by his side. The transformation reached everyone, not just the dog. A small society rediscovered the power of unity and compassion. Mrs. Jenkins, the oldest member of the community, nearing a century of life and possessing a wisdom that went beyond formal education, visited Buddy one afternoon. With hands unsteady from age but guided by a firm purpose, the old woman examined him with eyes that seemed to see deeper than the surface. After a few moments of silence, she spoke words no one present would ever forget. "This dog didn't come to us by chance. He carries a mission. He's here to remind us of something many have forgotten, that life only has meaning when it's shared with love." She then placed her hands on Buddy and murmured ancient prayers in a nearly lost language, passed down through generations of local healers. That same evening, Michael made up his mind. He could no longer live in the shadow of his mistake, hiding like a coward. If he wanted any chance at redemption, he had to confront the consequences of his actions and attempt to right his wrongs. With newfound resolve, he searched for information about Buddy, learning of the dog's miraculous recovery and the local community's devotion. In an uncharacteristic burst of impulsivity, Michael got in his car and drove for hours until he reached the small town where Buddy now lived. His arrival caused an immediate stir. People recognized him from the videos and news reports, forming a hostile circle around him as he tried to approach Evelyn's house. Insults were hurled, threats made, fists raised in anger. The businessman who had always imposed his will through money and influence now found himself utterly vulnerable before a community bound together by the need to protect one defenseless animal. When the confrontation seemed about to escalate, Evelyn appeared at her door and, in a voice imbued with surprising authority for someone so slight, told everyone to calm down. "Let him speak," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. If he came all this way, he must have something important to say. Michael, trembling and on the verge of tears, a sight unrecognizable to those who knew his ruthless business persona, stepped forward. "I came to ask for forgiveness," he said simply. "I know words can't undo what I did, but I want to help in whatever way I can. I'm not asking you to accept me or to forget what I did. I just want a chance to do something good, to make amends, even if I may never deserve it." Evelyn studied the man for several long moments, as if peering into the deepest corners of his now humble heart. Without a word, she motioned for Michael to follow her inside. The onlookers, still wary, began to disperse slowly, muttering their skepticism over his real motives. Inside that simple but welcoming home, Michael saw Buddy for the first time since that fateful day on the highway. The dog lay on a makeshift bed of colorful cushions surrounded by toys and treats. Noticing a visitor's presence, Buddy lifted his head and fixed his eyes on Michael. There was no fear in that gaze, no resentment, only a serene curiosity that completely unnerved the businessman, as if Buddy could see directly into his remorseful soul and understand the inner journey that had brought him here. Unable to hold back his emotions at that sight, Michael knelt down beside Buddy and gently stroked his head with trembling hands. To Evelyn's surprise, Buddy didn't pull away. On the contrary, he leaned into Michael's hand, as though recognizing this moment of reconciliation, and that was when Michael finally broke down, sobbing like a lost child who has found his way home. "He knows," Evelyn murmured into the thick silence. "Buddy has always known you'd come back one day. Animals have a wisdom many of us. Humans lose along the way. They sense honest regret and can forgive without holding back." Amid tears, Michael confessed to Evelyn how his life had unraveled since the incident. He wasn't looking for pity or absolution. He only wanted her to understand that the repercussions of his thoughtless act had triggered a profound change within him. For the first time, he grasped that life's true worth isn't measured by possessions or power over others, but by the ability to empathize, to acknowledge the dignity of every living being. Evelyn listened patiently, not interrupting once. When he finished, she handed him a cup of tea and replied with the calm of someone who understands the winding paths toward redemption. What you did was terrible, but the fact that you're here shows there's hope. Buddy showed us that miracles happen when you least expect them. Maybe your arrival is part of that miracle." Over the ensuing weeks, Michael became a regular presence in Evelyn's home. At first, the townspeople still watched him with distrust, maintaining their distance. But as time passed, and they witnessed his genuine dedication, spending hours caring for Buddy, learning about treatments, helping around the house, their hostility began to fade. Michael used his financial resources to establish a foundation dedicated to rescuing abandoned animals, with its headquarters in that same small community. He hired top veterinarians, brought in advanced rehab equipment, and set up a model shelter that soon gained national recognition. Yet more significant than these material contributions was Michael's personal transformation. He sold his mansion in Houston and moved to a modest home close to Evelyn. He abandoned ostentatious luxury and devoted himself fully to the animal rescue cause. Mornings found him feeding the dogs at the shelter. Afternoons he spent studying veterinary medicine, determined to help future rescues more effectively. Evenings ended with him reading to Buddy, stories and poems and philosophical texts he'd never dreamed of exploring in his former life. Buddy's progress continued to amaze everyone. With state-of-the-art equipment and treatments, he began to take small steps, first with assistance, then with growing independence. Each step forward was celebrated by the entire community as a collective victory. The children threw surprise parties, the older folks prepared special dishes, and the young adults filmed every milestone, sharing it online and moving viewers across the country. One particularly poignant afternoon during a physical therapy session, Buddy managed to walk a few steps unassisted for the first time since his accident. Though he wobbled and his gait was still unsteady, it was a remarkable milestone in his recovery. Michael, who was present for the session, couldn't stop himself from shedding tears at the sight of the dog he had once left on the roadside now, bravely defying the grim predictions of so many. Dr. Patterson, the veterinarian overseeing Buddy's care, a man of science who initially doubted the animal's odds, admitted his astonishment. "In 30 years of practice, I've never witnessed a case like this. Based on all our exams, Buddy's spinal injury was irreversible. There's no logical explanation for what we're witnessing here." Watching it all with a gentle smile, Evelyn offered her own insight. "Some healing takes place in places science still can't reach. The body responds not just to medicine but also to love, hope, and faith. Buddy is being healed by all of us, by every encouraging word, every kind touch, every prayer." Buddy's story and Michael's transformation eventually reached the ears of a film production company, which asked to document this astonishing journey. Initially reluctant, Michael finally agreed on one condition: that the film focus mainly on Buddy and the community, not on him. The crew spent months filming setbacks and triumphs, tears and laughter. The finished documentary, called A Four-Legged Miracle, went on to screen at international festivals, winning awards and touching audiences worldwide. The film brought even more attention to the plight of abandoned animals, inspiring similar initiatives in different parts of the country. Michael was invited to speak about his personal transformation, always insisting he wasn't a role model, but rather someone who had committed a terrible wrong and now strove, without any guarantee of success, to find a path toward redemption. Year after that life-changing encounter on the highway, the community organized a special celebration. Neighbors gathered in the town's central square, bright with flowers and colorful ribbons. At the heart of it all stood Buddy, now able to move about with only a slight limp, and beside him were Evelyn and Michael, bound by a connection that defied definition. Neither purely caregiver nor patient, but co-participants in a miracle that had reshaped the destinies of both dog and town. Mrs. Jenkins, the woman who at nearly 100 years old possessed a wealth of lifetime wisdom, asked to speak. In a soft but unwavering voice, she declared, "What we've witnessed here is more than an animal's recovery or a man's redemption. It's a reminder that we're all tied together by invisible threads of responsibility and love. When we forget that, we harm ourselves and the world. When we remember it, we open our hearts to miracles." As night fell over the small community and stars quietly shimmered overhead, Buddy rested contentedly, surrounded by people who had learned from him the profound lessons of forgiveness, perseverance, and transformation. Michael, gazing at the dog who had changed his life, felt a kind of peace he had never known. A peace not born of ignorance or denial, but the calm of someone who has found a purpose far greater than himself. The very stretch of highway where it all began still cut across the wide expanse of Texas, a silent witness to countless human stories. But to those who knew Buddy and Michael's journey, it was no longer just a place of abandonment and despair. It had become a symbol of how the darkest detours of the human soul can, when lit by sincere remorse and collective compassion, lead to astonishing outcomes of redemption and love. On that same piece of road, local residents placed a wooden sign with the words, "A miracle was born here." It might appear a simple curiosity to the passing traveler, but for those who knew the story, it stood as a powerful reminder that the greatest transformations often begin in the most unlikely of places and under the toughest of circumstances. Seasons passed, and the foundation Michael created continued to grow, becoming a rehabilitation center of national prominence and accepting cases from across the country. Volunteers arrived from distant states to learn the treatment methods pioneered there, returning home not just with new skills but with a profound understanding that every living creature deserves dignity and respect. Veterinary students interned at the facility, researchers documented the techniques, and the once-forgotten community turned into a beacon of hope that spread well beyond Texas. And thus, between the dust of the highway and the glow of the stars, between the cruelty of neglect and the warmth of an outstretched hand, between the paralysis of the body and the freedom of the spirit, Buddy's story continued to inspire people everywhere, reminding them that the greatest miracles do not always announce themselves with thunder and grand spectacle. Instead, they emerge through the small, daily acts of those who dare to look beyond appearances and believe in the possibility of transformation, especially when all seems lost. Buddy, now trotting with a slight limp through the flower-strewn fields around the property, became not only the emblem of the foundation, but a living legend among local children. They recounted his story over and over, weaving in their own flights of fancy, turning him into a kind of heroic figure or guardian of abandoned animals. The older folks smiled at these embellished tales but recognized that there was indeed something magical about the journey, a mystery beyond ordinary comprehension that touched the sacred realm of life's hidden wonders. Michael, once measuring his worth by the zeros in his bank account, now found meaning in each sunrise. The lines on his face were no longer born from worry over profits or image, but from genuine smiles and tears of gratitude. His gaze, once cold and calculating, carried a gentle depth, like a lake made crystal clear after a storm. And in the quiet moments when he recalled the man he used to be, the shame still burned in his chest, not as a crippling burden, but as a sobering reminder of the road he had traveled and the ongoing vigilance that true transformation requires. Buddy and Michael's story transcended time and the borders of that modest town, taking root like seeds in countless corners, sprouting hope in the least likely places. Because in the end, as Mrs. Jenkins declared before she passed on peacefully, leaving behind nearly a century of wisdom, the greatest lesson we can ever learn is that it's never too late to begin again, that no one is beyond repair, and that love, that unfathomable force that moves the stars and heals destinies, is always waiting to be rediscovered, even in hearts that seem most hardened by life.